Sporting Journal Radio, presented by Onyx.
Well, we're into the swing of things now here. If you like to fish, the best time of the year is upon us, and it's only going to keep getting better and better. And we're going to go up to Otter Tail Lakes Country now to check in with Erik Osberg and see how fishing is up there in Otter Tail County. Erik, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited. I can finally focus on fishing. You know, spring, you got turkey hunting, you got some snow goose hunting. It's one of those times where you have to, it's almost like fall where you have to decide if you want to hunt, if you want to fish, whatever. Well, now I can just focus on fishing for the next couple of months. That's all I'm going to be doing. Multi-species from walleye to pike and lake trout, and of course, bass fishing up there and panfish. We're going to try to get up and do some pan fishing yet up there in Panfish Paradise. But I remember one of the first times I ever fished in any sort of competitive fishing tournament. I haven't done it a lot, but the first one I ever did was in Otter Tail County, and it was for bass fishing. It was a little bass fishing tournament, just a small one. And I ended up catching a really nice smallmouth. And for whatever reason, I was thinking it was going to be all largemouth, and I was pretty excited when I found out I could catch some smallies up there.
Yeah, there's more and more smallmouth bass fishing opportunities. And I mean, if I had to choose between largemouth and smallmouth, I love catching smallmouth. I mean, if you said, Erik, you can only fish for one species of fish the rest of your life, and if I had to choose, I would probably choose smallmouth bass. There's a few handful of lakes that have good smallmouth bass populations. Clitheroe Lake is a fairly large lake that doesn't get a lot of fishing pressure. And Clitheroe is a great multi-species lake. There's good crappies, there's good walleyes, and there's smallmouth bass. What's another one? Lake Lida up by Pelican Rapids. Last year we had a high school event, and my boat didn't figure it out, but the boats that figured out the smallmouth bite, they did really well that night. And there's a couple others that I won't name, but there's some really good. And as far as largemouth bass fishing goes, there's some giant bass up here. Interesting. Yeah, there you go. That's Willie and I on an unnamed lake. That was our most recent outing.
Well, I recognize those trees in the background.
Did you see those trees? You see that? Those clouds look familiar. No, and so as far as if you're into bass fishing, and what's weird about this part of the world is bass get a bad rap, and they're easy to catch, and you're just a bass fisherman or whatever. The rest of the world doesn't seem to think that way. I mean, bass fishing
is huge.
Bass is huge,
yeah.
Nationwide, and so bass fishing opportunities. You have legit. I think our biggest bass that Willie and I got that night was a largemouth. It was 18 and a half inches. And this was a Tuesday night. We were only out for a couple hours. The largemouth or smallmouth we got. Yeah, there's Willie right at sunset. What's interesting about that night was, so again, this is about a week ago. And so the water temps aren't today what they were then. But we were early as far as bass fishing goes. The water temps were still in the low to mid 50s. And we were expecting the bass to be out deeper, not necessarily up on their beds or anything like that. So we were fishing these 8 to 10 feet of water. And we were struggling. We weren't windmilling bass. And so Willie likes to skip docks. That's one of his favorite ways to fish for bass. And I could sense that he wasn't necessarily bored, but he wasn't in a great mood because we weren't catching a bunch of fish. And so there was a stretch that had some docks, and I'm like, you want to go throw at those docks? He's like, sure. Because that's kind of, whether or not you catch a fish, can you skip it under that dock? That's a game in and of itself. So it gives somebody, a new game to play. And so once he started skipping under docks, boom, bass, boom, bass, boom, bass. So it was fun for me as a dad because, watching your kid stand on a bow of a boat, sling a wacky rig under a dock. And I don't just mean, under the first, there was a couple where he was like way back in the back of the dock. He got hooked up one time and the fish had him. Yeah, right there you go, right there, right? So there was one fish he was hooked up, and the fish wrapped around a pole under the dock, and he was able to keep the tension on it and get it back and he landed it. So I don't know what we learned that night other than if it isn't working, change something maybe, and don't be afraid to try skipping a few docks, even if common sense would tell you now is not the time to do it.
I grew up bass fishing, and I loved casting at docks and trying not to hit the pontoon sitting next to them, ringing the old dinner bell. But it does become a challenge, and it's fun. Even if you're not catching, you're doing something, and you're practicing casting, and your accuracy is improving and things like that. So that can be a lot of fun. And I used to fish for bass a lot, and we'd catch bass. And I've made my jokes about bass versus walleye. And Dan and I have been talking about it quite a bit recently because we grew up fishing for bass, got into walleyes, have fished mostly walleyes now. But the more I'm getting into the fishing industry side of things, and not just recreationally fishing, but the more I'm doing with, product shoots or media trips or things like that, it's bass fishing. Like, the bass fishing industry is giant. And I'm sure part of that is because bass live everywhere, pretty much in the country. You can find largemouth bass just about everywhere and some smallies here and there. But the bass fishing industry, if you want to be in the industry of fishing, a big portion of it is going to be dealing with bass. And with all these high school fishing teams and the college fishing teams, they're introducing all these kids, and bass fishing is one of the primary forms of entry for these fishing programs. What a great way to get people into it. And if it's going to be bass, I'm all for it. Whatever it takes to get them into it. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned the high school fishing league. We had a tournament one time on West Battle Lake last summer, and I've never really thought about West Battle Lake as a bass lake. Interesting side note, the state record smallmouth bass for Minnesota was caught in West Battle Lake. It was an 8 pound. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
How much?
8 pounds. There was an 8 pound smallmouth bass caught out of West Battle Lake. And you can go to the Battle. Yeah, no, I'm not saying there's a healthy population there anymore. I don't know what happened to them. But
they're all gone. They're not there anymore. Don't go there.
No, West Battle's. And so we were in this high school event, and Willie was throwing a big jungle jig in the front of the boat, and he caught a lot of 17, 18-inch largemouth bass. And it was our boat. And then my other student angler, he caught a bunch of bass on spinner baits and crankbaits, and we just had a hoot. It was just a really good time. Maybe we placed like top 5 or something like that. We didn't win, but we caught fish for 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
we caught fish, and I talk about this a lot. If you're bringing kids fishing, there's West Battle right there. Clitheroe, do you see Clitheroe right below it?
Mm-hmm.
Clitheroe's a really good smallmouth lake. The only disadvantage to Clitheroe on the south side is the only access on the lake, and it's a pretty small access. But, you see the little boat ramp there? Mm-hmm. But Clitheroe's a very underfished, very underappreciated crappie lake. It's got good walleyes. There's muskies in there, too. Clitheroe Lake is underutilized, in my humble opinion. Like, I never fish it. I fished it like twice in my life. West Battle, though, right, like you were showing there, Dan, that's a really good fishery. And West Battle, there's been some, I hate to even bring it up, but there's been some controversy in the past because the DNR does manage it for muskies. And so people have opinions about whether that's a good thing or not for the fishery. I can tell you that muskie fishing super deep. I can tell you muskie fishing on West Battle is awesome. Crappie fishing is awesome. Bluegill fishing is awesome. Bass fishing is awesome. Walleye fishing can be challenging, but it can be challenging on any lake. So,
well, I will say this too about bass fishing, particularly when it comes with how big the industry is, and then introducing all these kids in fishing leagues and fishing teams, high school, college, whatever. Is they're a fun fish to catch. There's usually a lot of action. They can be easier to catch. The big ones are obviously harder, but they jump out of the water. You can catch them on top water. It's exciting. It's fun. And 99% of the time you throw them back. So it's like a renewable resource, essentially. It's a sustainable. If you were going to pick a fish to be this popular in the fishing industry, whether it comes to tournaments or business or kids leagues or whatever, how great to pick a fish like that there's so many of them, you can catch them in a lot of places. And then you also, you're catching and releasing almost all the time. So you're putting all these fish back, and bass, I've caught the same bass, 2 casts in a row half the time. Like they can be fun to catch, and they're not too picky. I mean, sometimes if you sting them, they won't bite again for a couple of days, but a lot of times you can catch that same fish over and over again. So that's great.
Yeah. The analogy that I use is a bass is like a dog, right? Like, you do dogs and cats. And I'm not a cat guy myself. I don't have anything against cats. I've never developed a relation. Has anybody ever developed a relationship with a cat? No. I'm sure someone has, but a bass is like a dog, right? Like you walk in the door and the dog is happy to see you. And when you leave, the dog is sad you're going. And when you're down in the dumps, the dog jumps on your lap and you get to pet it. And so I think bass are a lot like dogs.
They're like therapy fish.
Yeah, they're like therapy fish, and why not take advantage of that? Why make fishing any harder than it needs to be?
Absolutely.
Why not go just set the hook and catch? My father-in-law, who's pretty near 80, he's in his 70s. Let's just say that he never fished growing up. Like he didn't start fishing till 4 or 5 years ago, and they have a place on East Silent Lake. And he is now, I would say he's an angler now. And it's thanks to bass, right? Like if we had trolled around that lake looking for walleyes every time, he'd be like, nah, I'm good. I don't want to go. But he likes going, he likes catching fish. And so I'd say he's a good bass fisherman now.
Yeah, it's fun. And when growing up, I hated trolling. It was boring, the whole thing. Now I must just be a glutton for punishment because I'll troll for walleyes all day long, even if I don't get bit at all. And I'll just be like, that sucked, but let's do it again tomorrow.
Well, that you're showing your age a little bit there too, because that's plain easy, right? Put something in a rod holder and just go ahead and trolling for. And I love trolling for walleyes too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against trolling for walleyes. That's one of my favorite activities, especially when it's dark.
Well, and I feel like maybe we should be talking about casting for walleyes more and more. It seems to be getting more and more popular. And we'll save that for a future show, though, once again. And Erik, if people want to come up and do some bass fishing or other fishing in Ottertail Lakes Country, what should they do?
They can find their inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com.
Hear more at sportingjournalradio.com or wherever you get podcasts.
Did you know there are more than 1,000 lakes in Ottertail County?
Yep, and I'm gonna fish as many as I can. I'm an outdoorsy otter. Nothing beats a full day of fishing for me. The lakes of Ottertail County give me plenty of options to lower my boat and snag the perfect catch. Not an outdoorsy otter? No problem. Ottertail County has something for everyone. You just need to find your inner otter.
To find your inner otter, go to ottertaillakescountry.com.